Would you hire a world memory champion, a theatrical director from Paris, a voice coach, a TV actor, and a professional magician, all to prepare for a wine competition? Have you ever wondered what it looks like inside a hotel room the night before a major sommelier competition? The room perhaps smelling of wine or cognac, and the room service waiter arriving to find miniature bottles spread over every surface? And did you know that the writer Tim Atkin nicknamed Gerard Basset the Red Rum of Sommeliers in the Guardian newspaper after the legendary racehorse who won the Grand National 3 times, and that Gerard considered it one of the finest compliments he's ever received? Well, tonight you're going to get those tips and stories and more. Now, if you're watching this video on the replay, please, in the comments, type the word replay. I want to hear from you. What's in your glass? What's the weather like where you are? And of course, if you're here on the live stream with me, please do the same. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online food and wine pairing courses, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. And I'll introduce 2 of them momentarily. Now, I'm live streaming this video for the first time on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and it's based on a recorded conversation that I had with my wonderful guests here for the Unreserved Wine Talk. I'll be jumping into the comments live, so I will be here live in the comments with you. So let me know, what stories are you enjoying? What tips and questions do you still have? I want to hear from you. All right, and let me say that 2 of you are going to win a copy of our guest's commemorative edition of Tasting Victory, The Life and Wines of the World's Favorite Sommelier by Gerard Basset. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose 2 of you randomly from those who contact me. So back to our guests. Nina and Romane Basset are the co-founding trustees of the Gerard Basset Foundation, the charity to honor the legacy of Gerard Basset. Gerard, born in France in 1957, is the only person to have held simultaneously the titles of Master Sommelier, Master of Wine, World's Best Sommelier, and the holder of a Wine MBA and the OIV Master of Science in Wine Management. He mentored hundreds of young sommeliers, many of whom went on to win national and international titles of their own. Gerard was diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus in October 2017, and he spent his final months writing his memoir, Tasting Victory, completing it the day before he died in January 2019 at the age of 62. He is survived by his wife Nina and his son Romane. The Gerard Basset Foundation has to date directly supported more than 2,000 individuals in more than 35 countries working in wine, spirits, and hospitality. And they join us now from Norfolk and London in the UK. Welcome, Nina and Romane. We're so glad to have you here with us.
Thank you very much, Natalie. It's nice to be here.
All right, cheers. All right, so tell us in a nutshell what this book is about and what makes it different, say, from other wine memoirs. The subtitle is quite explanatory, but maybe you can just give us a high-level summary of what this book captures.
Do you want to go first, Roms, or do you want me to?
I can happily do so. So, thank you, Natalie, for having us on again. Tasting Victory and the Life and Wines of the world's most favourite sommelier. It really it gets to the heart of my dad's life. It sort of tells the story of him from when he was a
Sorry,
boy.
Romane, I'm going to stop you 1 minute. You're very muffled. Can you hold I don't know, I guess
Is that better?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Now I can
Sorry.
hear you. Yeah, so if you
Okay.
wouldn't mind starting again,
Of
that'd be
course.
great. And I was hearing a lot of clicking in the background. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't know.
My suspicion is it's our dogs in Norfolk.
okay,
possibly.
okay.
But sorry, apologies about that. So, Tasting
That's all right.
Victory is the story of my dad's life. It really starts off when he was a young man and wasn't sure what he wanted to do in life, and follows him as he discovered hospitality, and then within hospitality he discovered wine, and then through that he discovered the competitions, the certifications that really sort of defined him. And I think it's very special because obviously I was there for much of it, but I wasn't there for all of it, so I get to see some of the things that I missed before I was born. But it tells the story, I think, as through those events of how Dad conquered adversity, how he trained himself, how he used his work and he used certifications and the competitions to train himself, to improve himself, to prove that he could, you know, thrive in education, he could thrive in competition, but then also how he carried that forward, talking about, you know, the mentorship that he so loved and the team members that he nurtured along the way.
That's lovely. So we'll get into some specifics now, and feel free, either of you, to comment based on who feels comfortable, or both of you. Now, Gerard, if I understand, once worked in a pornographic bookshop, and he concluded that experience taught him one of the most important lessons of his career, and maybe you can share what that was, and then he put that lesson to use in becoming the world's most celebrated sommelier.
But maybe I'll start. Yes, he didn't know it was a pornographic bookshop when he applied for the role. It just said a specialised bookshop, and he actually thought, oh, well, it's probably something really interesting like, I don't know, religion or food and wine or something, you know, nothing at all like pornography. But when he got there and he realised it was, I think what struck him first was how very ordinary it was. It didn't matter that it was a pornographic bookshop. People would come into the bookshop just as if it was any other type of bookshop, and they had no embarrassment. And I think that made him really, that's where his fascination with people really started, because he was intrigued that, you know, people from all walks of life would be coming into such a bookshop with no embarrassment, would take a book from the top shelf, would, you know, flick through it, maybe decide to buy it or not buy it. And so I think that's where his fascination and his interest in people and the dynamics of people really started.
Fascinating. Now, Nina, I think this was before Romany was born, but tell us about the time when Gerard and his friends stood up in the middle of a crowded London restaurant and sang La Marseillaise together to a room of utterly bemused diners, and then did the same thing years later at Terra Vina, another restaurant, except this time he followed it with a loud and passionate rendition of God Save the Queen.
Yep, so the friend in question both times was actually Raymond Blanc, who here in the UK is a very famous Michelin-starred chef and was a very good friend of Gerard's. The first restaurant was actually one of their shared protégés, Xavier Rousset's restaurant called Texture in Marylebone in London. And Raymond had recently broken his leg, and we'd gone out for dinner just to sort of catch up with him. And we'd had a very lovely evening, and towards the end of the evening, obviously wine had been drunk, and they decided that they would sing La Marseillaise, standing on a chair with Raymond, which obviously was a bit of a feat because he was from top of his hip to the toe in a cast. And of course, people were sort of looking and then whispering, "Isn't that Raymond Blanc?" And it was a very fun evening, and nobody was disturbed. Everyone thought it was great, and Xavier was like, "Oh my gosh, what are they doing?" But it created a great atmosphere in the restaurant. And then a number of years later at Terra Vina, which was actually mine and Gerard's hotel, Raymond very kindly came to host a wine dinner with Gerard. And of course, at the end of the evening, everyone was very jolly, and Raymond stood up and started singing La Marseillaise. Gerard joined in, but then said, of course, we can't sing La Marseillaise without singing God Save the Queen, because I'm an honorary British person now, because he'd got dual nationality so that he could compete representing the UK. And to Raymond's horror, he started singing God Save the Queen instead of, singing La Marseillaise. And Raymond to this day says, I understand he wanted to be an honorary British man, but he should have sung La Marseillaise as opposed to singing God Save the Queen. So it was always a sort of a running joke between them.
That's great. And if I understand correctly, Romany, you are named after a bottle of wine on your father's wine rack?
Yes, indeed. The story goes that...
Sorry, you're still muffled.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes.
Apologies.
Thanks.
So the story goes that there were a couple of different wines in the running. Apparently, if I'd been a girl, it was possible that I would have been Satakaya.
Okay.
But then it was I think Mum and Dad were thinking about the name, and then the Romane Conti label winked
From
at them.
Burgundy, the famous
Yes,
Burgundy Pinot
exactly.
Noir. Hmm.
And so they thought that Romane would be the name to go for, and made the decision that if I was a girl, it would have been spelt as it is spelt with two e's because it's La Romane. So feminine, being a boy, there's only the one e kept for me.
Okay.
So it's always been very lovely to have been named after a wine, and sort of, I suppose, nominative determinism at work from day one.
Yes, exactly. Did you name your pets after wines? Like, is there a Merlot and
We did.
a
We did
Chardonnay there?
indeed.
You did.
Yes.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah,
I was
we've
kidding, but
actually.
yes, you're
No,
serious
no,
about
we
this.
really did.
What?
So in Gerard's lifetime, together as a family, we had two boxer dogs. The first one was called Merlot, the second was called Malmsey, and we have a
Okay.
third boxer dog since, sadly, who hasn't ever met Gerard, and she's called Maipo. And the reason that she's called Maipo is because Gerard always named the dogs with a wine theme beginning with an M, and we wanted to connect Maipo with Gerard, and he obviously won his world championship in Chile, so we named her Maipo because it's a wine region in Chile. So yeah,
Right, a nice cool valley, cool climate wines.
yes, yeah,
That's great. I
she's a
love
cool dog.
it.
Yeah.
Now, Romany, you were named among the 100 most influential people in wine and one of Harper's Magazine's best or top 30 under 30. You wrote a chapter, excuse me, for the commemorative edition of Tasting Victory, and you are now working at the heart of the Gerard Basset Foundation. Your father's name must open many doors for you in the wine world. He was so famous and has such a legacy. Has that been a gift or a weight that you carry, and how do you deal with it?
That's a very good question. I mean, I'd say it's very definitely been a gift. Um, as you say, I sort of have grown up in the industry, and both, mum and dad took me everywhere when I was growing up. Always come on wine trips with them. Often come to, dinners with them if obviously I wouldn't be drinking when I was very young, but as long as I was polite and I dressed properly, I could come along. So I've been very privileged to grow up in this industry. So, you know, to say that it would be a weight on my shoulders, I think would be to do it a great disservice. I've had a wonderful, wonderful experience in this industry, which has been, not many people get. So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for it. And I suppose I'm very cognizant of the fact that what I'm trying to do now with the foundation, the way I always describe it is, Dad had to work so hard to get where he got. If I was going to wine events now and on my name tag, you pick up a name tag and it said like Gerard Basset's son as the only reason I'm there, I think he wouldn't like that. But because now it says co-founder of the Gerard Basset Foundation, it is still his name that's opening those doors. But I'm doing something that aligns with his legacy, aligns with his values, that it's distinct from what he did, but it is my own role, and I think he would like that. That I'm not relentlessly riding his coattails. Of course, I had amazingly I'm amazingly grateful for all the doors that it opens, but I'm
Absolutely.
also trying to carve my own space.
I
Yeah,
think
and Nina
if
mentioned in some of our exchanges that even when you were a baby, she had you sleeping under the table at Vin Expo, one of the largest wine expos in Bordeaux. So you truly grew up in this atmosphere.
I
I
think,
did.
sorry, I just want to jump in there and say, although probably Gerard's surname has opened some doors for both of us, to be honest, but certainly in Romane's case, I think it's really important to say that, yes, his name might have helped open the doors, but it's definitely Romane's own character, personality, hard work, and drive that's kept those doors open and subsequently opened other doors. So I do think, Romy has to be congratulated for creating or co-creating the foundation, because it's very much what it is today is because of Romane's hard work and vision.
That's wonderful. Very nice. Now, Romany, you described writing the chapter for this commemorative edition as a way of processing your grief. Your father, by contrast, resisted writing personally about his own obstacles throughout his time that he was working on the book. His editor, Felicity Carter, magnificent editor, writes that, quote, she never managed to convince him of just how remarkable his story was. That's amazing. How did writing this chapter help you through the loss?
Well, it's interesting because obviously it was a form of processing, but it was, quite a few years on after his passing, and I think it helped sort of collect the strands of what's happened since. So since then, the foundation has been created, and you'll know, like I begin that chapter talking about one instance of people walking up to me and telling me stories about dad that, stories that mum and I had never heard. Some of them we knew, sometimes it's from people we knew, but often it's from people we've never met, but who dad met them while he was on a wine trip somewhere and then gave them a bit of advice or gave them the time of day or was just really friendly and a good laugh. And, I think I really found it helpful to collect all those strands when I wrote that chapter and think about, like, yes, it could be viewed as, oh, it's constant reminders of someone special who's not there, but equally it's also, oh wow, how lucky was I to have a dad like that. So yeah, I think that's what really helped me. It really reaffirmed to me how lucky I was to have him as a dad, and it really sort of, in a way, it helped me think about my own memories of him because I obviously we talk about his legacy every day with the foundation, and we hear so many wonderful stories from people. It also helped me to think back to some of my own stories. Like, as an example, like this wasn't in the chapter, but we used to have a game. If you take a lift in a hotel, we would sprint from the lift to our hotel room door and race each other, and like things like that. It really helped bring those memories back. So, yeah, it
That's
was a
great.
process, and it was lovely to think back to him as the man as well as the legacy.
That's terrific. Now, you completed a first class degree from King's College London and served as the president of the Wine Society there. Where did writing about wine begin for you? Was there a specific piece of writing long before you wrote this chapter, an experience, maybe in a cellar or a vineyard, that made you feel that you really wanted to write about wine as well?
Well, so I mean, I would by no stretch of the imagination call myself a wine writer or anything approaching that, but I would say preparing for tastings at King's, I loved it. I remember in my first year I joined the society, and then I was made president ahead of the second year, and I mentioned it to Dad, and Dad said, well, if you're going to be president of the society, you need to know your stuff. So he signed me up for WSET level 1 and 2, and it was at the time he was unwell. He'd just started his chemo, so he was at home. He wasn't traveling as much, so we used to just talk about wine on the walks, and I always held that with me, and he, put me in touch with loads of people to organise some amazing tastings. And it was in preparing for those I really enjoyed sort of thinking about the wines we were going to serve, thinking about, the society. We very much aimed for people to come along to an unpretentious surrounding. So maybe people hadn't had chance to try these sort of wines before. What was it being university? People
Sorry,
from
you're
all
getting
like,
muffled again?
sorry,
That's
what with it
okay.
being apologies.
It's
What
okay.
with it being university and people coming from all walks of life, we really wanted to make it as approachable as possible. So I tried to reflect that when we were talking about the wines and when I prepare my notes for the tasting. And I think honestly, Dad helped immensely with that because he was, the last word you would use to describe Dad was stuffy or unpretentious. So he helped me realize you can have a top level discussion about wine while also being really approachable and warm and friendly.
That's terrific. What, Nina? What is one of your most memorable moments with Gerard and wine?
Ooh, I mean, there are so many, but I suppose the one that you touched on where we arrived at Bin Expo with Romane, he was literally a month old in his pram, and them saying, I'm sorry, you can't come in. And we said, but, Gerard is here for a lunch. He was the winner of the Bollinger Tasting Cup when he was awarded his Master of Wine. And so they were holding the lunch in his honour. So we said, he has to come in. He's the guest of honour. And so they said, okay, well, you can bring the baby in, but you'll have to carry the baby. You can't bring the pram, which was fine. I carried him around the wine fair. But when we got to the lunch, of course, I had nothing to put him in. So I literally just lifted up the tablecloth and put him under the table and said to all of these very important people who were there, please be careful, there's a newborn baby under the table. And they were like, oh, and everyone lifted up the tablecloth and there he was fast asleep. So that was that was a fun memory. Obviously, I can't not say when we were there in Chile as a family and we saw Gerard eventually on the seventh attempt take the the title of ASI Best Sommelier of the World. That was incredible. He called us up onto the stage. That was a very special moment for Romane, especially to be up on the stage with his papa. But I mean, there were so many.
How old were you, Romane, at that time?
I would have
10,
been 11. 11.
Ah, okay. Did you get to hold the trophy?
Yes, and damn near dropped it as well.
Ooh, it was a big one, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Marvelous.
In fact, you
so
did
Gerard
drop
writes that.
Okay,
Oh,
well, fair enough. And Mum's outed
you
me there.
did.
There were two trophies, and there was one that was hollow, and
Okay.
I did manage to drop it, but happily
Oh,
only left a very minor dent.
minor dent. Okay, so you made your mark on the wine world early.
Sure.
That dent's from me back in whatever. Excuse me. Okay, so Gerard writes that from 200 yards away, walking home from school, he could hear his parents shouting, and that every time he turned the corner to his home street, the tension for I'm quoting him now, the tension forced my head down to look at the pavement. He describes watching his brother's arm slashed by a knife during one of his parents' fights, yet he went on to make people feel really comfortable in his presence, more so than anyone else in the profession. When did he talk to you about the specific connection he made with what he experienced as a child and what he became as a professional, either of you?
Well, I think first off, it's really important to say he didn't have an easy childhood for sure, but in their own way, his parents loved him very much, and he loved his parents. So it wasn't perhaps as happy an upbringing as it might have been, but it certainly I think he would say that it shaped him in ways that helped him in future life. So, he never would have wanted to be, he never would have wanted to be portrayed as a victim for sure. I think it gave him an understanding of always trying to be kind and decent, and if somebody upset you, you shouldn't be treated, you shouldn't be prepared to be walked over, but on the other hand, you should be kind in the way that you dealt with whatever the issue was. And so at home with us, in our home life, he never enjoyed conflict. He was always very keen to smooth things over as kindly and as gently as he could. So he was a very gentle man, and I think, sorry, that's my dogs are not being gentle.
Is that Merlot?
That's my po. Stop it.
Oh.
And yes, he was a very gentle man, and I think that was because of the way his upbringing had shaped him.
Okay, cool. Now, speaking of animals, he writes that he gave all my love to animals, I guess as he was growing up, because showing open affection to his parents felt impossible. One of his most striking observations is that the chaos at home gave him a sharp sensitivity to people and a need to make people feel comfortable. Can you give us a concrete example or a specific story that you witnessed or is in the book that shows what that sensitivity looked like in action, say at a restaurant or elsewhere?
Do you want me to do that one, Ron?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
you worked closer with Papa on the floor, so you probably have more specific examples to hand.
Yeah. I mean, I think he saw it as a personal challenge, or we both did actually, when we were running the hotels. If somebody would arrive on a weekend, Friday evening, they've had a really difficult week. They've had a row with their wife in the car driving to the hotel. They'd been stuck in a traffic jam for hours, and they would arrive with their sort of shoulders up here and really stressed and tense. And we would look at each other and say, okay, this one's going to be a challenge. And we worked our magic, if you like, between us and the team. And by the end of their stay, they would leave and their shoulders would be relaxed. They'd be smiling. They'd be talking to their wife again. They'd be promising to come back. They'd have had a great time. And that was because Gerard was this all and everything sort of host. You know, he was very humble, so he would share his wine knowledge with people. He would stand and chat or sit and chat in the bar with people. He would stand at the table and talk to people, and you know, people would say, why does this wine go with this? And he would spend the time, it didn't matter how busy we were, he would spend the time that each customer demanded of him. And so he had this way of making people feel really special and really listened to, and you know, people would arrive as a guest, but they would often leave as our friends. And you know, the testament to that is that we're still in touch with lots and lots of the people that we knew from Hotel du Mans and Hotel Terravina days. We still see them personally, Romane and myself. So he had a real knack of talking to people and making them feel special, and that was no more important than with our team of people. You know, he had protégés all over the world now, you know, they've all become very successful, but he nurtured them in such a way that he you know, he made them feel that even from a young age he empowered them. He gave them responsibilities that lots of people wouldn't have been brave enough to do when they were only 19 and just starting out. And he allowed them to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And he was very gentle with the way he showed them and pushed them forward. So he pushed them forward,
marvelous.
but holding their hand at the same time. So I mean, you know, he was very special when it came to people.
Indeed. Now, he writes about this in his book. He was fired from a clothing shop after 2 weeks, then quit a factory job before they could sack him. Then he was let go from a luggage factory, and he writes, "It took me a long time to realize what was wrong." What was the quality or combination of qualities that eventually surfaced for him? Was there a person who saw something in him that he hadn't seen in himself that enabled him to realize perhaps, you know, wine was the world for him? Or what came through all those experiences?
I think possibly because of his upbringing, you know, he hadn't studied very much at school. He was the class clown. You know, he wanted to have everyone laugh at him, and so he hadn't done very well academically. And so all of those kind of jobs that he describes in the book, of course, they were, you know, fairly menial jobs which bored him. They didn't grab his attention. And it was only when he came to England to watch a football match and enjoyed the hospitality of the English people, specifically those in Liverpool. And he then said, I'm going to come back to England and I want to work in England, and I'm not qualified to do anything. I'll get a job doing something fairly menial. And he got a job as a pot washer in a hotel on the Isle of Man, and then thought, actually, I maybe could learn to be a chef, because maybe that's something that I might be interested in. He liked food. So he went back to France and did some French cooking qualifications. And he enjoyed being a chef, but he didn't really like the stress of the kitchen, because he didn't like to be in that sort of stressful environment, because it reminded him of home. And so he came back to England and thought, well, you know, maybe I could be a waiter. That seems a bit calmer. So he went back to France, did some waiting exams, which were called CAP at the time, and came back again and started as a waiter. And because he was French, somebody in a restaurant in the New Forest said to him, oh, can you tell me about this wine? And very much of his nature, he was very embarrassed that he didn't know enough about the wine to be able to give an honest and well-rounded answer. So he went and bought a book. And it was buying that book that really opened his eyes to this fascinating world of wine, which, you know, encompasses history, geography, so many other aspects than just about the wine. And he was hooked. And from that day onwards, you know, it was really him that self-developed. So he had mentors, of course, along the way, but later, the first initial getting into wine was really him discovering it himself just from opening a book, because he didn't want to be embarrassed when somebody asked him a question about wine.
That's great. I love this story as well, but among the most striking images in the book is when Gerard was spending his days off in London, he would go to bookshops and buy catering manuals to learn, and that he once persuaded a grocery store employee to remove a folded napkin from a window display and slowly demonstrate the technique so he could sketch it in his notebook. And he did this not because anyone asked him to, but because he noticed he didn't know how to do it. I love that image of he was a really self-taught, self-made man. And another one, he describes his first meal at a 3-star Michelin restaurant, dining alone at Paul Bocu's very famous restaurant, watching the room with such intense focus he barely touched his food. And I'm quoting from the book, it was like watching a ballet. That dinner confirmed he was on the right path. So how did a man with no fine dining background, no role models really at home, develop such a precise understanding of what excellence looked and felt like? It was just simply by this observation and incredible thirst for learning.
Yes, exactly. He was very tenacious. He was very determined. He loved learning. He loved discovering. And so, I was horrified when he told me the story about the napkin, and I didn't know about that until he actually wrote the book. And then I read it and said, my gosh, did you really do that? And he said, yes, why wouldn't I? For him, it was kind of normal. Why wouldn't you ask somebody to help you and show you? And I said, but I can't imagine they've ever had anyone do that before or since. And he said, no, but, they were very happy to let me. I think they just wanted to get him out of the store, to be honest. But that was his character. He was just, he just had this thirst for knowledge and he was constantly wanting to better himself. And I think that was stemmed from the fact that he'd gone to school and come out with so little. And then he just had this love of learning. For him, it wasn't a chore to sit down every morning and open a wine book and study for hours on end. It wasn't a chore to write endless essays. He wanted to share that with as many people as possible.
Wow. Now, Nina, you set up blind tastings for Gerard every morning before major competitions, opening dozens of bottles in hotel rooms, bringing out miniatures of spirits from your suitcase. The book describes a room service waiter arriving to find bottles and miniatures covering the floor at dawn. Tell us about maybe another memorable tasting along that line.
So there's one very memorable one. Yes, do you want to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think it might.
So we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm just going to jump in because I'm afraid, as we discussed that day, I'm going to have to jump off after this anecdote and leave Mum with you for the rest. But
no problem.
I remember, I distinctly remember, there was a wine that Dad had not tried. Can you remind me what wine that was, Mum?
Yes, it was a rosé, Cava rosé.
Cava rosé, and he was really paranoid. What if it comes up? I haven't tried it. So we ended up finding a bottle of Cava rosé in an off license.
And an off license?
So it's I believe a liquor store.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And him doing a very quick tasting of it in the car park from the boot of the car.
Ahead of him going for an exam. And actually, of course, as one would expect, the Cava never came up in the exam, so it was all for nothing, but he enjoyed it.
But he was ready for it, though.
He was ready for it, just in case, yes, yeah.
That's great.
He was.
Well, Romane, if you have to go, please, thank you for joining us for what you could, and good luck with your next
thank you again. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for talking about the book and sharing Dad's story. It means the world. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. All right. Bye-bye. Okay, so Nina, for the 2004 Athens competition, Gerard hired a world memory champion, Nick O'Brien, who took him for a walk and taught him how to turn lists of sake terminology, the Japanese rice wine, into vivid, exaggerated personal stories involving motorbikes and mischief. And he worked with another memory champion, Jonathan Hancock. How did that work exactly? What were they doing for him? Like, what were some of the specific techniques that they taught him that helped?
So they came to the house quite regularly, actually, and Gerard found them really helpful. But how it worked was that they broke down all of these very complicated, names of wines or regions of wines or lots of different grape varieties, and they gave Gerard a way of remembering them through association. So, for example, the Japanese wines, the idea of the motorbike was because obviously motorbikes have sometimes Japanese names like Kawasaki or something. And so they connected. Let's have a story of you riding on a Kawasaki with a very attractive lady on the back of the bike, and you ride to, and then they would create a story. And because it was a story, it was much easier to remember it in your head than if you were just learning by rote all of these different names of different types of sake. So Gerard
It's true. Our brains are wired for stories.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
So it was a much easier way. And of course, he would then tell that story to somebody over dinner because it was a funny story to retell, and that would help him to remember the names because everyone would talk about the story. So it was a very clever way of learning. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was there any other memory techniques that he picked up from them?
Probably, but I wasn't learning the memory techniques, so I can't remember them.
No worries. No, it reminds me of studying for exams, and you make acronyms of the 5 principles of whatever it is, chemistry or something, to try to just put it
you're
together.
right. So what he would do is he would draw maps every day. So he would study maps, and then he would redraw them in all different colours, and he would write all of his notes, all of his study notes. He would write them longhand into all different folders, and then nearer the competition he would take all of those notes and he would write them on little cue cards. He would summarize them and put them on cue cards. So for him it was writing all the time, and condensing it down. Yeah.
So that one little piece of information can expand in your mind to a full essay answer or whatever. No, that's great. I love this. He was so dedicated. Now, Gerard had a voice coach in London who stopped him after 15 minutes of a presentation and said point blank, "My God, it sounds so boring. You speak with such a monotonous way, you are sending me to sleep." And he came back 2 weeks later and told him, "You have improved, not bad at all." What had he done to improve his voice quality?
So I remember he came back absolutely incensed, not that he'd been criticised, but the way he'd been criticised. It was in a very kind of brusque and quite harsh manner. The lady in question had sort of brushed him off and said, "It's rubbish, and you've sent me to sleep." And he came back really cross that he'd failed. Gerard didn't really enjoy failing and then not trying again. I mean, obviously he tried again 7 times to get his world championship. So he was determined that he was going to do better. So he said to her, "Okay, I'm going to come back." And she said, "Fine, but I'm not sure it's worth it." And anyway, so he practiced, every day he would stand in front of me and he would practice talking about, a scenario in a restaurant, or we would practice different aspects of service and so on. And I would say to him, "Well, I think you need a bit more of liveliness here or a bit more intonation there." And then he went back 2 weeks later and gave it his all. And because of the way the lady was, I think for her to say, "Well, it's quite good now," that was the biggest compliment that he was ever going to get from her. And so he came back elated that he'd done it.
That's great. Every aspect here covered. So for the Athens 2004 final competition, Gerard planned to suggest an 1896 Madeira linked to the first modern Olympics and to Greece's surprise Euro 2004 football victory over Portugal. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Then he writes that he relaxed too much, talked too long with guests during the decanting, and ran out of time for the wine correction. What does that story say about where he was most vulnerable?
I think what he learnt ultimately after that contest was you needed to use the adrenaline and the nerves that happen in a competition to your advantage, and never relax so much that you feel like you're at home in your own restaurant. I mean, obviously, when we train SOMs, we always say you need to feel at ease, think that you are in your own restaurant. But of course, in your own restaurant, you don't have a time limit. You don't have a time, clock ticking saying you've got 5 minutes to do a decantation. So I think it taught him a lot in terms of it's great to be relaxed. It's great to make your customers feel that you're in control while you're on the stage, but you mustn't let that adrenaline be lost. You have to use it to your advantage. And then by the time he got to Chile and the winning competition, in his mindset it was, you know what, I have nothing to lose. I've done this so many times. I'm going to do it this once final time more. If I win, it'll be amazing. I'm just going to step on that stage and enjoy it and enjoy every moment of it. And I think that was the sort of the turning point really for him, because I think he suddenly felt there was no pressure on his shoulders anymore. He decided he was going to have one more try. If it failed, then he'd have done his absolute utmost, and he had said he would retire. I don't believe that he would have. I think he would have carried on, because I can't imagine that he would have ever hung up his sommelier apron until he had won that title, because it was the one that eluded him for so long. But it showed on the stage. You know, he stood on that stage in Chile and looked like he was enjoying himself. It didn't feel like he was competing. Well, it didn't feel like it for him. It felt like it for all of us.
Sure, sure. Now, Gerard failed the theory section of the Master of Wine exam 4 times before passing it, which is not unusual, as, by the way. It has a notoriously low pass rate of about 10%. He had left school at age 16, wrote essays in a second language for this exam, and described spending hours studying The Economist magazine to understand how a well-constructed argument is built from beginning to end. He writes that the unofficial motto of the exam is investigate like a fine detective and argue like a brilliant barrister. What is the specific part of that journey that he found most humiliating, and how did he talk about that later?
I'm not sure humiliation, but certainly in terms of frustration, and I think probably it was the writing of the essays, because, you know, in terms of the tasting, he was doing tastings as a sommelier. In terms of the learning, he was learning for his other kind of life that wasn't exams, but his contest life. So the thing that eluded him was the essay writing, because he didn't do that. You know, in his day-to-day work, he didn't need to write an essay. In his exams, he might have needed to write an essay, but the style of writing essays was completely different from what the MW were wanting. So he took the expertise and the experience of somebody who was a writer, a very nice lady who came every week to the house and made him write essays. And she said to him, you know, read The Economist, because the style of writing, the way that the MW wants you to write, The Economist is in a similar sort of style, and it will help you. And just keep practicing. Smart. And practicing. And so, I don't think it certainly wasn't humiliation. It was frustration, and then, you know, just again this determination that he would crack it, and he would learn to write essays well. And he did. You know, he became a really proficient essay writer.
Wow, remarkable. Now, he won the Bollinger Medal for tasting excellence in his first attempt at the Master of Wine practical section, then recalls a conversation years earlier when the Bollinger CEO of the company had said it'd be wonderful if Gerard ever achieved both the qualification and the medal. These long game conversations clearly mattered deeply to him. Can you speak to the way Gerard set his ambitions? Was there always a horizon beyond the current horizon?
Yes, I think there was, until after the 2010 contest. And in fact, that was something that concerned him, because he'd always had a goal. He'd always had something that he was aiming for. So, you know, whether it was to become a master sommelier, to become a master of wine, to gain his wine MBA, to do his OIV Master of Science qualification, to attain the ASI Best Sommelier of the World. There was always something that he was planning. Sometimes it would be 2 or 3 years ahead. Sometimes he would have to jump through various hoops to get to where he wanted to go, but there was always something. And then suddenly in 2010, he'd won the World Championship. And I remember him saying to me, what do I do now? You know, I haven't got any other goals. And I said to him, I'm sure you'll find something. And he said, yes, but, you know, I can't it's always been there. It's always been the obvious and logical next step. I don't have an obvious and logical next step now. So he threw himself into becoming very involved with the ASI, which is the International Sommelier Association. He became their technical director. Ultimately, later on, he became their sort of master of ceremonies for the competitions and so on. And he loved it. You know, he was traveling around the world with sommeliers, immersed in the world of sommeliery. But I think probably deep down, if he could have found another competition or another exam that he could have got his teeth into, he would have loved to.
He would have done it. Okay, so for that 2010 competition, Gerard assembled a team that included a business coach, 2 former protégés, his usual training group, and a PR consultant named Rebecca Williams, whose children attended the same school as you. Rebecca used Gulliver's Travels as a framework for encouraging Gerard to think differently about self-exposure and vulnerability. What did that mean exactly? How is she using Gulliver's Travels to help Gerard?
So I wasn't privy to their conversations because they were very they were one-to-one. It was actually me who'd suggested that he speak to Becky, because up until 2010, he had been learning in the same sort of style. He had a formula that worked, and it had stood him in good stead. But we realised that, from when he'd been competing the last time to 2010's competition, things had changed. He was older. He had to kind of up his game in some way. And so I said, maybe you need to speak to somebody that's completely... do you know, I can't remember how old he would have been in 2011.
2010?
2010. He would have been...
In his late 40s?
Yeah, late 40s, early 50s, yeah. So I said to him, you need to take somebody who is not involved in the wine world, but who you trust enough and feel comfortable enough to work with, but somebody from outside who comes with a completely different perspective. And Becky will definitely make you think outside of the box. She's a very clever, very astute lady, and very gentle and calm in the way that she speaks to people. So I knew that would work for Gerard. And they, obviously he knew her because the kids were at school together. But he really enjoyed having the sessions with her and trusted her judgment and trusted her expertise. And so they would go off and have these sessions over tea at Chewton Glen, actually, which is where Gerard used to work many years before. And they would discuss Gulliver's Travels. And he would come home and he'd say, I've got it. She's just turned a key in my head, and suddenly the door is opened and I see what I have to do. And he never explained what or how, but whatever it was, it worked, because, he then went on to win the next time he competed. So he was very grateful to Becky.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Gerard gave Corinne Michaud the head sommelier position at the Hotel de Vin Birmingham when she was in her early 20s, barely speaking English herself, having arrived as a commis just the year earlier. He told her the news and she nearly fell off her chair. Can you tell us another specific story of him identifying something in someone that was not yet visible to them?
Yeah, I think probably every protégé that Gerard has ever been involved with would tell you that they gained something from Gerard being able to unlock something within them that they didn't even know that they had, or that he empowered them, or... So, yeah, I think he just had this ability with people to find what it was that made them get excited about something. And if it was wine,
actually,
great.
Yes, like Laura Reese, the
yes,
ballerina.
Laura Reese, we called her the ballerina because she was always running around very elegantly, she was just a joy to watch in service, because it was like watching a ballerina circling the floor. But it
So
might
it's
have
beyond
been,
technical accuracy.
Yes, for sure. It was just something. And sometimes it wasn't even necessarily his somms. Sometimes it would be one of the chefs. He would just see something in a chef and just, I think, because he had time to talk to people, he would spend the time that was needed. There was never, it was never looking at his watch and saying, I've only got 5 minutes. He would sit and talk to people for as long as it took and give them the time that they needed to find whatever it was inside of them that made them flourish.
Now, his diagnosis of cancer of the esophagus came in October 2017, and but he continued to write the book, continued to push on. What was it like to know that I mean, I don't know if you even can capture this into words, but that he finished writing it the day before he died? Do you think he was holding out to finish this thing, like the way he was so determined to win these competitions? Do you think, I've got a job to do and I'm not leaving before it's done?
Yeah, I think the book became something that was very important for him, because when he was diagnosed, he said to me, I don't know how I'm going to cope with my life changing. I've been used to traveling a lot, and suddenly I can't travel. I'm going to have to be at home. What am I going to do with myself? And I said, you should write a book. And he said, I've written a book. Even I used to say to him, if you're tired and you've got insomnia, read your book, because it would send you to sleep. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but it was, it was a very technical book. And so it was always a joke between us. I'd say, oh, I'm tired, let me have your book, I'll read it and it'll make me go to sleep. So I said, but not that kind of book, not a technical book. You need to write a book about you, about your story, because people will want to read it. And he said, don't be ridiculous. Of course, nobody's going to want to read it. And I said, I think they will, because you have so much to give, so many inspiring stories to tell. And so I said, if nothing comes of it, just write it. But don't, because what he would do, he was a perfectionist. So normally he would write something, read it, rewrite it, read it again, rewrite it. And I said, you haven't got time to do that. You just need to get it all down. Just brain dump it onto the page. And I think he found that really useful. And he actually started to enjoy writing it. And so by the time he was actually, really very, very poorly, and he'd been in hospital for a lot of weeks, he knew that he had another final sort of chapter to write, and as was his way always, he didn't want to leave something unfinished. And he said to me, I need to finish my book, I can't do it here in the hospital. And he begged the doctors to allow him to come home, and the doctors said to us both, if he comes home, he won't be going anywhere other than, unfortunately he will pass away at home. We can put a system in place to make sure that he's as comfortable as possible, but, we would prefer him to stay in hospital. We understand that he has this real need to go home. He wanted to be with his dog as well, he wanted to be with Malmsey. He loved her desperately. And so they let him come home, and they put an amazing structure in place to allow him to be home with nurses and so on. And he was home 7 days. And in those 7 days, he would write. But obviously, he couldn't write like he had been previously. He couldn't write for hours on end. But he was writing a little bit each day. And he was very proud that he'd been able to do that. And that kept him going, I think. And then when he'd finished the chapter, he'd finished what he had to say, literally, he laid his pen down and he said, I'm ready. I can go now. I've done it.
That's quite something.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So the foundation has a major fundraiser, the Golden Vines Auction, which has raised more than, or nearly 1.2 million pounds, I presume, at its first event in 2021. And the UK singing sensation Kylie Minogue performed and dedicated a song to Gerard. Wow. Ronan and Storm Keating have returned every year since. How did those relationships come about? How did they start participating in this?
So Kylie was actually, there was no previous relationship with Gerard other than he loved Kylie. He was a great fan of Kylie. He used to play all her songs always in the car and so on. And so it sort of felt fitting when we had the opportunity to ask her to be involved in the very first one, and she said yes. We were thrilled. And of course, when I went to thank her for being involved, and I said, Gerard was a great fan, and she said, well, I think it's amazing what he managed to do in his life, and I think what you're doing is great, so I'm going to dedicate a song to him. And she did, and I was so overwhelmed with the emotion I can't remember even what the song was, because it was just one of those moments you think, oh my gosh, you know. So everyone says to me subsequently, what did she sing? And I'm like, I can't remember, but it was amazing, whatever it was. And then
Yes.
Ronan and Storm were actually at the first event. They were there as guests, and Ronan actually stood up and very impromptu gave an auction prize. It wasn't planned, but he did, and then because it was such a popular prize, he actually gave it twice, so we raised double the amount of money. And then he said to us, you know, I really want to continue to be involved. What can I do to help? And so subsequently, he and Storm have been presenters at the Golden Vines events subsequently. But there was a connection with Ronan before. He probably wouldn't remember. But when he was in his boy band, Boyzone, many, many years ago, they used to perform around the country, and they used to come and stay at Hotel Duvan in Bristol, which was one of our hotels at the time. And Gerard used to come home and say, oh, Ronan was there today, or, you know, the boys from Boyzone were there and they were nice boys. And so he never kind of, you know, he never sat and had dinner with them, but obviously he'd sort of seen them and maybe said hello once or twice. But no, we're hugely grateful to Ronan and Storm that they are so generous with their time and that they are so involved with the Golden Vines. It's great.
That's fantastic. In Reflections, the chapter called Reflections, Gerard writes, quote, I was not blessed with the strength and skills of great athletes or sportsmen that I admired. I did not enjoy the stunning good looks of the likes of Paul Newman or Brad Pitt. Equally, I did not have the brilliant and sharp intellect of Gary Kasparov or Stephen Hawking. However, one feature I've been privileged to possess is rock solid determination. Absolutely. And then, I mean, that just clearly comes through, but I just had to share that line from the book. The epilogue closes with Gerard writing, I would do it all again. What do you think he means by all? Just going through his entire life as it unfolded from his childhood to the failed jobs to, of course, the glory and winning the competitions. Do you think that is what he meant?
Yeah, I think he did mean that. I think even though, you know, there were times when he had ups and downs like everybody, I think he would, because he would say that those failures, those many attempts at exam and competition success, all of that shaped him and made him. And he would say it made him a better person. It made him understand his failings and what he would have to do to, you know, start all over again. So yes, I don't think he regretted a moment of anything. He would have absolutely, yes, I think, because if he hadn't have lived the life he lived, he wouldn't have been the man he was. So, you know, I think he would, I don't think he regretted anything that he'd done.
That's marvelous, and true testament to his influence. More than 1,000 people came to his memorial at Winchester Cathedral. That is amazing. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Museum of Gérard Basset, which 3 objects do you think you would put in the central display, Nina?
I think that's quite easy. When just before he died, he said to me, he had an office and no one was ever allowed in his office. In fact, you couldn't open the door to his office because it was so full of books, and he never used his office, but it was like a shrine to books. And he said to me, when you eventually go in my office and you have to clear it out, you'll be really cross, because in my desk you will find something or things and you'll be amazed. And I was thinking, gosh, what am I going to find? So when I did go eventually into his office to clear out his books and I opened the drawers of his desk, there were probably more than 3,000 odd Laguiole corkscrews of all different types, different styles, different colours. All of the world champions of ASI had a Laguiole created for them, and he had hundreds of each of one of those. So I would definitely have to have a Laguiole corkscrew in that museum of Gerard Basset. I would definitely have to have wine books, because they were what, you know, he just loved. He would collect wine books like other people would eat a hot dinner. You know, he would buy the first edition and then that would be the one that he would use to study. So because he was using that one, he would buy another one just to have on the shelf so it was pristine. And then, of course, if it was republished, he would have the second edition, the third edition, and so on. So he had hundreds of books, so it would have to be a book. And I think probably then also it would have to be photographs of his two beloved dogs and Romane, of course. So yeah, a trio of photos, the
And
two
you.
dogs and Romane. Well, yeah, me
Yes.
too, maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And if you think Gerard could share a bottle of wine, if he were with us today, if he could share a bottle of wine with any person outside the wine world, living or dead, who do you think he'd share a bottle of wine with? And excluding
Well,
family members.
okay, so I think I can't exclude a very close friend. I will give you somebody from outside of the wine world, but in terms of a close family friend who really has been instrumental in his life subsequently to him passing away more than he was while he was alive, although they were great friends while he was alive, and that's somebody called Lewis Chester, who has been the person who has created the Golden Vines, who has helped to ensure that we have the financial means to run the foundation. So without Lewis, none of what we do would really happen. He's a wine collector. He rang Gerard up one day and said to Gerard, I want to learn more about wine. I think you're the man to teach me. Will you do so? And they became firm friends. In fact, Lewis was the only person who came to the hospital to visit Gerard because Gerard didn't want anybody else at the hospital. He didn't want to have his other friends and there to visit, but Lewis was allowed to. And so I think he and Lewis, in fact, did drink a very special bottle of wine together and both loved it. And it was a very special moment for them both. And so I think if they could recreate that again, they would. And it was a bottle of Le Pin 1996. They drank it on the terrace at Hotel Terravina. And, it's just one of those very special moments. But if I had to choose people
Famous
from outside
Bordeaux, just for those who don't know.
yeah.
Yes.
So if I had to choose people from outside of the wine world, I think it would have to be Gary Kasparov. He mentions him in the book. Gerard was very keen on
the
chess.
chess player.
Yes, he was very keen on chess, and I think he would be fascinated to share a glass of something with Gary and, explore his abilities as a chess professional and a chess champion. And probably, of course, I can't leave out a footballer because Gerard loved football, so I suppose he would love to have the chance to sit down with somebody like Zidane and talk about football over a glass of something nice. And in terms of what would they
Forgive
drink,
me, who is Zidane?
Zidane is a very famous French football player. He played in the World Cup, represented France, and he's an idol in French football. He's a legend. And yes, if they were going to be drinking something, Gerard loved all wines, but probably fortified wines, champagnes and burgundies were some of his favourites. So I suppose he would have to have had something like that. So there would definitely have to be a Madeira in there somewhere. There would definitely probably have to be a sherry of some sort, probably a Fino en Rama. And then he would probably choose a very delicious, I don't know, a champagne, a Winard, or, Krug, Bollinger. I mean, it could be any one of them, couldn't it? Henriot, I mean, he loved them all. So, yes, they would have fun, whatever they would choose to drink, for sure.
That sounds wonderful. This has been terrific, Nina. Of course, the book, Tasting Victory, the commemorative edition, is now available. It's published by Académie de Vin Library, and it's available on their website and all the major book sites, Amazon, Chapters, Barnes & Noble, etc., Waterstones. Is there anything else you want to add as we wrap up that we've not covered?
No, I don't think so. I mean, thank you very much for having us on. I think just to maybe one thing, people say, why did we write a commemorative edition? Why did we want to write additional chapters? Because hadn't Gerard covered everything himself? But I think it's really important that people understood that, yes, he wrote a book. Yes, he saw it completed to a point. And it was very much, he wanted it to be a legacy of what he hoped that he would be able to inspire people after he died. But we wanted it to be very much that it continued to inspire people. And I thought it was really important that people understood that he had no concept that we were going to create a foundation in his honour. We never talked about that. And so, to be able to add some extra chapters that talk about the foundation and talk about the fact that people are still 7 years on after his death, still talking about Gerard with the love and respect that they do, he would be so humbled by that and completely shocked that, people are still remembering him. And so I'm immensely grateful to Hermione Island and the Académie du Vin Library for allowing us and giving us the opportunity to republish the book. They weren't the original publishers, so for them to take it on and run with it and really believe in the book as they have done, for Romane and I, we feel truly appreciative of that. So thank you, Hermione and the Academy.
Yes, Hermione is a wonderful editor, person, publisher, all
She
round.
is. She is, for
Yes.
sure. Yes, yeah.
All right, Nina. Well, thank you again. I'm going to say goodbye for now. Don't log off just yet, but thank you, and good luck with everything you're doing with the foundation and the book itself. It's a marvelous story of Gerard's life and the values that go beyond his life too. And you are helping. You and your son Romane are perpetuating those. So congratulations.
Thanks very much, Natalie.
All right, cheers. That was one.